Well, first of all, obviously, as we come together this evening, we must pay our respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and we acknowledge their elders past and present, and pay our respects to all those of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander heritage who are with us tonight. Now, we're here tonight to discuss the media as we're getting closer to the federal election. And what a complex issue the media is now in 2025. Very different from when I nervously began as a cadet journalist on the Sydney Morning Herald many years ago. And in those days, women were not allowed to be news reporters on the Sydney Morning Herald, so I had to start on the women's page. That has changed. But in other respects, well, it was a very staid media in those days. Quite comfortably staid, shall we say. Yes, there was different radio stations, different television stations, different newspapers, but it was all part of the one media bloodstream. It was standard, if you like. There were different approaches, different styles, but it was, we all knew where we were, didn't we? With the way the media was and how it operated. When I taught journalism students at RMIT not so very long ago, we were still able to teach them in a way that belonged to that broad media bloodstream. It was basically the same standard principles for whatever form of media you were in, whether it was radio, television or print journalism. Very different these days. But the important thing was that we were able to be teaching them the sound, well-tried journalism principles that actually applied to all media. They didn't always get them right, but the standard was there and it was fairly clear. Now, despite the common furphy that all journalists are always and always have been wildly inaccurate, not the way I was taught on the Sydney Morning Herald, where accuracy was the gold standard. And it was certainly what I tried and my colleagues tried to inculcate into the journalism students that we taught. Accuracy and neutrality. Keep your opinions to yourself unless you're writing an opinion piece. They were the rules that I was trained in and that we tried to inculcate. And when I see so many of them out there in the media now, they are actually, the ones I can think of, are actually keeping to those rules, which makes me very proud. But that sort of standard has all gone, hasn't it? That broad stream media standard has gone. It's also very different. I wouldn't want to be trying to teach journalism students now. There's no standard media. We've got social media, podcasts, influencers. That's where people get their news now, such as it is. And much of it is wildly distorted or just plain wrong. Fake news, as someone has called it. And in this environment, when it is more important than ever, what is left of the old standard media is really struggling. Now, you will have heard recently that Trump has closed down the Voice of America. What a red flag that's got to be for all of us. Democracy itself is at stake now all over the world. If ever we needed strong, independent, accurate, careful media, it is now, in all forms of media. And I'll just say very briefly, thank God for the ABC. Let's hope it keeps as strong as it could possibly be, and we hope that all our candidates will want to hold that true. Now I must hand over to others to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr Muriel Porter for welcoming us to this evening. My name is Jennifer Bowen and I'll be moderating the event with our three distinguished speakers on the panel. I want to point out, of course, that while we do have three of the candidates for the seat of Kooyong here this evening, we did try to have the whole seven, including those particularly who were pre-selected some time earlier. We did send invitations to everybody, including the Liberal candidate Amelia Hamer, giving her the provisional date for this evening. We then sent another email when we had the confirmed date after the date of the election was fixed. And then a final email as we set about the publicity. But unfortunately we had no reply. When the closing date came for registrations for candidates for the seat of Kooyong, we discovered that there were three further candidates. And so we endeavoured to get in touch with them. And we did have a reply from one, David Vader from the Trumpet of Patriots. He's not been able to be here this evening, but was very willing to provide a written statement of his views on the media, covering several of the topics that we anticipate will be covered this evening. And so we'll include those as the evening progresses. And I want to say too at the start that ABC Friends, who have organised this evening's event, ABC Friends is not aligned to any political party. It's a non-partisan organisation. It's committed to the ABC as a publicly funded broadcaster. And that doesn't mean it's unconditional support. There will be times when ABC Friends is actually critical of the ABC. But nonetheless, it supports the view that there should be adequate funding for the ABC so that it can serve all Australians, and that it should be independent of government, whichever party or parties are in power. So to this evening and our three candidates. And I guess I want to say that it's a courageous thing to put your hand up to be the elected representative of a constituency. And how effectively these candidates have used the media will probably play a part in who is elected on the 3rd of May. But it's also the case that thinking about the media is going to be one of the responsibilities for whoever is elected as the Member of Parliament for Kooyong. And that's because politicians have the power to affect our media. They can pass legislation and they can create regulations that determine how the media operates. They can raise money by levies or taxes or licenses, I'm not going to say tariffs. They can raise money and then they can dispense that money in the form of grants, perhaps to the ABC, but to community broadcasting or other forms of media that will benefit the community in which we live. So tonight, we're going to learn something about how the media figures in the thinking of the three candidates that we have. The way we've planned the evening is that we'll start with 25 minutes or so of questions up here, going through some of the issues that have been in the news and covered in Parliament in the last term of government. But then it's over to you to ask questions. So you can either dig a little bit deeper, if you like, or introduce a new topic so long as it is related to the media. So I'd like now to introduce the three panellists that we have here tonight. Jackie Carter from the Greens, Clive Crosby from the Labor Party, and Dr Monique Ryan, Independent and the current MP for Kooyong. Would you please make them welcome? Look, we want to get to meet you to some extent, just to get to know you a little bit. So can I ask very quickly, or get very quick answers from you about the sort of media that you use? What do you watch, read, listen to, whether it's in part of doing your job, this job, or maybe when you have downtime? Jackie.
I am a big old podcast nerd. I consume so many podcasts. If I'm doing anything around the house, housework, walking, anything, I'm listening to podcasts. So that is my main media consumption. I'm also a TikTok tragic. I am an elder millennial, so I fall on the very, upper boundary of the general I guess, demographic of people who engage with that particular platform. But yes, I do consume a lot of TikTok as well. You won't see me on there dancing though. But they are, my two primary sources, and probably YouTube as well. So I don't really consume a lot of traditional media. But I guess that is the way how things have been heading in recent years, that there is such a fragmented spectrum of ways that you can consume media, and there's something for everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, fellow TikTok tragic and general social media user over here. So get quite a lot of information and news through Instagram, that kind of thing, but also through more traditional sources, be it radio, TV, watching mainly the ABC News, as well as the Saturday paper, published by Schwartz Media. And yeah, I would say that's mainly it. Not really into the podcasts. So.
I'm an old person, so I read the paper. I'm old enough to remember when there were 2 papers a day.
Oh my.
Yeah, great. So my family have always been voracious paper readers, and I'm proud that one of my 3 children reads the paper every day as well. But yeah, we get The Age every day, we get the Saturday paper, we get things like the New Yorker and the Atlantic, and they sit there until I've got a chance to catch up on them. Podcasts a bit, but I don't spend that much time in the car anymore. It was always something I'd do when I was in the car. I don't do TikTok. You're not allowed to have it on your parliamentary phones, but also I'm too old. But as an MP, you have to be on over all the social media platforms. So I came off it, I've gone back on it sort of a bit. X, Twitter, Instagram. I don't do Facebook, but my team does. You have to keep an eye, as a politician, you have to keep an eye on all those platforms all the time. It's actually, well, I'm sure we'll come to this, I think deeply unhealthy, being on those social media platforms all the time, but I kind of have to.
Yeah, look, that just takes us straight to the first question that I wanted to ask, and that's to do with social media and legislation that was passed at the end of last year, and it's got a rather imposing title, the Online Safety Amendment, open brackets, Social Media Minimum Age Bill, and it was passed in November last year. And this basically is intended to restrict access to social media for people under the age of 16. Not all social media, but quite a number of social media. And Monique, you were involved in voting against that bill at the time. The Labor Party supported it. I think the Greens were united in their opposition to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Monique, I mean, a lot of people are concerned about the potential damage that social media can have for young people. How is it then that you opposed a bill that was setting out to restrict access?
So, yeah, it's an interesting question. So, there's a few pieces to that. So, essentially, I think social media is not great for young people's brains. I actually think the online milieu on the whole is not great for people's brains. As a former neurologist, I know that we all struggle these days with attention. And school kids, they're sitting in the classroom, they've got their laptop, they've got Snapchat, they've got various things pinging and going off at a time. Their attention spans and attention to detail is not as good as the last generation's was. And that's not their fault. It's got to do with the way that these things change your brain chemistry. It's a fact. It happens to the rest of us as well. So lots of people have concerns about social media. Lots of parents have concerns about their kids and what they're being exposed to on social media, and the lack of ability to control that in many instances, and the fact that we know that there's been, for example, a significant increase in mental health issues, particularly in girls who are exposed to social media at a young age. Whether the cause and effect of that is a bit, we could talk about that. We know that during COVID, when kids were sort of confined to an online milieu much more for schooling and things like that had a really negative impact on kids' mental health overall.
So these are problems, yes.
They're all problems, and they're things that people are seeing. But the issue is there but for some people, the reverse of that is that for some people, they found their communities and they found their people online. So we're talking about, gay kids in the country who are finding supports online that they would not have been able to access otherwise, and for whom that the ability to do that has been an absolute lifeline. So I guess the first thing is identifying, yes, there is a problem in many instances with social media and young people's interaction with it. The second is, how do you act on that? The legislation that the government put up at the end of last year was poorly thought through and ill-conceived. It didn't actually say how the social media platforms were to control young people's access to social media. I didn't think that it would be effective. But what I thought it would do is basically remove the responsibility of governments to act on those platforms to control the content that they host. So basically the government can throw its hands up now as a result of this piece of legislation, which I spoke to experts from around the world, including the ones that the government was inaccurately citing when they said we're in favour of this legislation. I'm talking to people saying we are not in favour of this legislation. We think it's a terrible idea. The problem is the government can now say, well, we've legislated, kids can't get on those platforms, the social media platforms are going to have to change it. And so, they can basically abdicate any responsibility for those young people now. So if they're on those platforms, they're not supposed to be there, and it's not our problem that they're there being exposed to whatever might be there. So I thought it was a really poorly conceived piece of legislation, and I was not going to support it until I knew that it was going to be effective.
It's a difficult thing, you weren't there at the time, but
Yeah.
can you respond to that? Do you think this is just kicking it down the road? Because the way Monique describes it, it's a pretty cynical approach to what is regarded as a serious problem.
Yeah, like the effect that social media is having on young people is a serious problem, and parents were telling the government at the time that they were concerned about it and that they wanted to see action on it. And so the laws, as they were passed, they'll come into effect 12 months from when they were passed. It wasn't an instantaneous thing, so that gives Meta and Snapchat and all the other platforms, X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, time to work through solutions as how they're going to prevent young people from accessing it. And at the end of the day, there isn't going to be a penalty for young people or their parents if they do end up accessing the platforms. Any sort of penalty will be on the platforms themselves, and that will include if they inappropriately hold data, privacy data, and breach the Privacy Act. There'll be significant penalties for that.
Okay, so Jackie, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, Clive, how are we validating the age of users accessing social media? Does everybody have to give their data to these tech giants?
No.
Then how do we validate age?
That's for Meta and
there we go.
to decide.
So there's so many problems with this piece of legislation, as Monique mentioned, and social media is part of our world now, and I think I'm going to cite one of our local independent media moguls, Leo Puglisi of 6 News, who was very involved in advocating for this legislation not to go ahead, and would say that when it comes to swimming, we don't tell kids not to swim, we teach them how to swim, we educate them. And that is such a big piece around social media, is that education piece. What happens when kids get to 16 and we just throw them out into social media? They haven't been taught how to use it, they're not aware of the harms. So it's really a piece of not only educating the kids, it's educating parents, it's making sure everybody knows what the harms are and how to mitigate against them. And also pushing back on these tech giants and making sure that they're held accountable for the harms that they're imposing upon their customer base.
And they pay tax.
That's it.
Thank you very much. There was another piece of legislation proposed by the Albanese government last year that was not put to the vote at the end of the day, and this was one dealing very specifically with mis and disinformation. And I guess it goes some way to indicate just the real difficulty in determining how you can have policies that will safeguard the community when it comes to what's happening out there in social media land. I just wondered too if we can hear what David Vader thought about that. One of our representatives from ABC Friends is going to read his comment in response to a question about what to do politically when it comes to combating misinformation. Michael.
Misinformation is a big problem that's going to get bigger with AI, but we must tread very carefully before encroaching on free speech. I agreed with withdrawing last year's misinformation bill because it risks centralising censorship. Instead, I back community-driven solutions, for example, crowdsourced community notes on X.
Okay, does anyone have a view on whether it is possible to have effective crowdsourced control of misinformation, or is this something that does require legislation or some sort of regulation coming from government? Clive, would you like to jump in?
Sure.
Yeah, this is like the Albanese government's position is that we do need to regulate and regulate these tech giants and ensure that they are responsible for their algorithms pushing like misinformation and disinformation and all the bot accounts that peddle this rubbish, and have ensure that they're responsible for it. I don't agree with the comments David Vader provided, saying that it would, be government censorship or centralised censorship, because nothing in the bill would actually have allowed the government regulator to directly jump in and say you have to take down this specific post or that or the other. It would just more be generally about like developing a strategy and making sure these tech giants are accountable for what's on their platforms.
I think that there's a bit of a problem in expecting the great mass of humanity, good as they are, to regulate or keep an eye on, monitor on the activities of the tech giants. Why should people be crowdfunding for something like that to do that, when really that should be the responsibility of these mega companies, which are making squillions of dollars internationally, to behave in a way that is which demonstrates a degree of corporate responsibility. So I don't think it's reasonable to offload it. I think we should have standards for the platforms. I actually supported the legislation on misinformation, disinformation when it went through the House last year, with a real degree of disquiet. The independents worked on it really hard with the Minister, Michelle Rowlands. We had real concerns about it. We went back and forth on it. We talked to a whole lot of experts. We thought we'd improved it. Got to the point where people thought that it was reasonable, because the problem is there is a real problem with misinformation, disinformation. We see that every day. We're seeing on our social media accounts every day. We're seeing our young people being bombarded with falsehoods all of the time, and we wanted to take action on that. But supported the legislation and then didn't get through the Senate. And then I actually was glad it didn't get through the Senate, because I was really concerned about the potential untoward effects of it. It's a very, very difficult thing to legislate, but I think we kind of have to try. It's not going to be an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Monique just said there, is that we know that there's an issue with disinformation and misinformation. I just don't think we're quite there with the solution of it yet. We know that something needs to be done, and I think that it requires a lot of collaborative work, not only across the Parliament, but also with experts to determine what that is. But I think obviously a lot of it does lie with these tech giants. It absolutely is not the responsibility of the general public and their consumers that they're making money off to ensure that they're producing correct information. So what the answer is, I'm not sure, but I know that there needs to be action in that space, and hopefully we get to some meaningful action not too far in the future, because the current environment is nothing short of toxic in terms of the misinformation that's out there.
And from what you're all saying, I guess we deduce that you feel that this is political action that's required, because the tech giants aren't doing this voluntarily.
Oh, absolutely.
So something needs to happen at a political level in order for there to be the kind of regulation, kind of controls that will benefit everybody. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the tech giants, they benefit from the outrage that exists online, that is generated by this misinformation, disinformation, by people, arguing and whatnot, and that just creates them more money.
Can I come now to a subject that will be dear to the heart of quite a number of people in this room, and that's funding by government for the public broadcaster, the ABC. And some would argue that this is actually a way of combating mis and disinformation, that you will get verified news made available to people. There have, however, been quite a lot of cuts take place to ABC funding over the last 10 or 12 years, and some small measure to improve the level of funding for the ABC from the Albanese government. What would be your position when it comes to the future of the ABC? I mean, there's even been suggestions by Peter Dutton that there should be an efficiency review, which is, by many people, is a precursor to cuts. Do you think that there should be any investigation into how the ABC is spending public money, or should there be actually attempts made to increase the allocation that it has? Monique, you're sitting right by me.
Thank you. So my understanding is that that before 2013, the percentage of the federal budget expenditure which went to the ABC was about 0.31%, but by 2022 that had fallen to about 0.13%. So obviously there's been a significant decrease in funding of the ABC over time, despite its output actually having increased during that period. I think the ABC is very, very important. And I think that it has a number of different roles. Obviously, there's entertainment. There's also, I think, preservation of a social fabric and a sort of civic and cultural education. It has a really important role for that. It has an important role for keeping people safe during emergencies. And I think it has an unheralded role in soft diplomacy in the Asia Pacific as well, which to a significant extent has been defunded in recent years. And so there's a lot to be gained from restoring the ABC's budget back to that 0.31%. I know some of you were there last night at the Asylum Seekers Forum, and good for you, you're all getting brownie points for your repeated attendance. But I made the point last night that, you know, the budget for the ABC in Australia is about $1.2 billion, which is about, coincidentally, about as much as we spend on keeping 100 refugees on Nauru every year. So, you know, people say, where'd that money come from? Where are we going to get that money from? We could get that money. You know, it's not that much money that we would need to restore funding of the ABC to a reasonable extent.
Well, I'll start off by saying that the Albanese government has restored the ABC's funding from those last few rounds of Liberal cuts to the tune of an extra $43 million annually. And as for their role in how they use that funding, that's, you know, the ABC is independent from government, so that's a matter for them, and how the ABC board and whether it's being used efficiently, and it's actually the board's statutory duty to ensure that the funding is being used and allocated as efficiently as possible. As for further funding, the Labor Party doesn't have any intention of, you know, be it an extra 100 million or moving it to being 0.31% of the budget instead of 0.17 or whatever it currently may be at. And yeah, the ABC does a very good job with the funding it's already got in delivering the, you know, emergency broadcast services that Australians rely on in bushfires and other natural disasters, as well as news, entertainment, content on iView, you know, radio, everything.
Jackie?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that question there because I thought you were repeating the other question to Clive that Monique answered. Anyway, but I feel like it was something regarding...
It's the ABC does receive quite a large amount of money from the government. There are calls for that amount to be increased. And I'm not simply asking, should it have more money or not? But how can you decide whether it should have more money or not? What kind of things would perhaps influence making that decision?
Yeah, so if we think about the ABC of 20 years ago and the content streams it was producing then compared to now, it has grown exponentially. There are so many more avenues that the ABC is responsible for producing content for, and the funding has absolutely not kept up. And as we know, it has been absolutely gutted since 2014. So the Greens obviously want to see that restored to 2014 levels and also indexed based on that. And that alone is kind of the base level for the Greens. We'd also like to see it legislated as well in terms of funding, because we know that having a public broadcaster, as well as any public service or public service that people rely on, is so critical. And we have seen what happens when privatisation happens, and we can't afford to lose our public broadcaster. And it's almost a weaponisation to underfund it and defund it so that people devalue it. And by doing that, people don't see the value in it, because they're essentially creating an environment where people lose trust in the service because they haven't funded it to the capacity that it needs to be to perform at the position that it needs to. So I feel like I went on a tangent then, but I think that there are ways that successive governments, not only in the ABC space, but in a lot of public services, underfund and defund to then create an outcome that they're looking for. And I think that is what's happening here.
I mean, it is the case that, take a round of applause.
Thank you.
It is the case now that the government doesn't just fund the media by giving grants to the ABC and of course SBS. It also makes grants available to community broadcasting, and through the News Media Assistance Program, it does put funding into journalism in those areas where there is no media outlet. And this refers mainly to regional Australia, some of remote Australia. Newspapers have closed down, radio stations have closed down, and it's only by government assistance that there is actually any journalism that takes place in those areas. And this is now being supported by government. So just very quickly, would you support the possible increase of intervention by government in providing journalism services and other kinds of broadcasting with community radio across Australia going into the future? Just quickly.
Yes, and I think we should have content quotas basically for Australian content on streaming platforms, which should be an important part of, which should be legislated by the government and enforced, and that would help both the ABC and SBS, but also other media platforms in this country to maintain the same sort of standards that we've had before, but also help those people who are producing that content within the country.
Yeah, this is going on to quotas for Australian content, which is something that the Albanese government did think about legislating for, to oblige international streamers to have Australian content on their platforms. Very tricky to legislate, given the free trade agreements. But Clive, you're nodding knowingly.
Yeah, look, I'm not the Minister for Arts, Tony Burke, or Michelle Rowland, the Minister for Communications, but those two ministers have been looking at introducing streaming quotas, and it's something that we remain committed to. But the consultation process with, not just the companies who own the streaming platforms, but also the bodies representing production companies, actors, etc. That's taken longer than we would have liked, but we want to take time to make sure that when we do put this legislation to Parliament, hopefully in the second term, if we win on the 3rd of May, that we get it right, so then we don't have to go back in a few years' time and amend it and tweak it because it's not had the intended effect, or has not been effective, or has gone too far, or they're increasing prices in Australia. Yeah, we want to make sure we get it right.
Jackie, do you have a view on quotas on streaming services?
Absolutely support them. I think they are integral in not only providing the Australian stories that people so deeply connect with, but also providing opportunity for artists in our local community to have those employment opportunities. And we are so vastly bombarded with the cultures of the US and to a lesser extent the UK, but we have our own voice that we need to preserve, and the ABC has such a critical role in that. I can think of so many shows off the top of my head that are just ABC classics that have absolutely shaped my view of the world, and I think that's so critical that everybody has the opportunity to consume that.
Thank you very much. we've lost a little bit of time this evening, so we're not going to take up any more at this end of the room. I'd like to make it over to you to ask your questions of the people that we had on the panel. Yes, can I start here? Oops.
Thank you. I don't know whether this service is now being reinstated, but would the Friends of the ABC support the re-establishment of Radio Australia? I thought it was a major foreign strategic blunder when we see broadcast to the Pacific region and to Southeast Asia in those languages, because if we're not there or the ABC's not there, somebody else will be. Do the Friends of the ABC intend to support the re-establishment of Radio Australia? And what do the candidates think of that kind of idea?
Thank you. Candidates, can we go to you? Because I think the position of Friends of the ABC is that yes, Radio Australia should be restored and there should be a full gamut of services available to the Pacific, but we're not actually under the spotlight. Nobody's going to be like for us next week. So let's hear from the candidates what they feel about international broadcasting being funded indirectly by government through the ABC.
As for specifically Radio Australia being established, I can't say I'm certain on what the Albanese government's position on it is. I haven't heard particularly that we have any intention to do that, but we have provided funding to the tune of about $41 million for additional broadcasting and reporting in the Indo-Pacific region. As you said, it's a very effective tool of soft diplomacy and ensuring that they see Australia as a partner.
Thanks, Naomi. So I touched on that earlier. So I think we certainly should do it. I think it's a form of soft diplomacy. It's important for relationships in the Asia Pacific. And Peter Dutton, I think, announced this afternoon that he's going to increase spending of the defence spending to 3% of the GDP. I would put it in under that bucket, actually, because I think it's a pretty good use of our money in terms of shoring up our relationships within the region. And you could easily, if you had looking for a line item, put it under the defence budget. So thank you.
Bravo.
Yes. Yes, I think it should be restored. I'm not sure if that is the actual official party position, but it sounds like it would be. So I'm happy to wing that one. Yes, I support that.
Okay, another question from the audience. Would anybody like to ask about something that we've perhaps looked at tonight? Yes, over there.
Thank you. I feel like, in a sense, we're among friends tonight. We haven't got some of the obvious opposition here, and maybe that's a good thing because we can sort of follow our thoughts to productive and constructive decisions or aims or desires. But my question is, we're facing an onslaught of social media and the international giants. They're taking control slowly but surely, especially for our young people who don't, I hate to say it, but they don't listen to the ABC as much as we enjoy doing. So what can we do to make the ABC more relevant, especially for our young people, and in particular to resist the onslaught which is coming from those multimedia giants who have, let's face it, profit as their prime motivator, not us getting accurate and reliable information, let alone disinformation. Thank you.
Okay, who's going to jump in and answer this one first? Bearing in mind that the ABC wants to be independent of government, is there something that government can do that will act against the misinformation, disinformation that young people might be vulnerable to receiving?
Well, I think we do need to legislate against misinformation, disinformation. You know, we're still in, right now in the middle of an election campaign, which is entirely legal for politicians to line their political advertising, which is, it remains extraordinary that is the case. So we on social media platforms or media platforms in general, we do need to enforce misinformation, disinformation legislation. It's not going to be easy. I think we've touched on that already. It's not going to be easy, but we need to do it. I do agree with you, though. I don't want to, with the ABC, I think they do need to diversify pretty significantly. I was on Insiders a couple of weeks ago and I actually broke it to David Spears that young people aren't watching Insiders, and he responded by asking me a question that reduced me to the inability to speak because I had no idea what he was talking about, so he got me back. But I think I think there is an issue. You know, young people don't read the paper, they don't watch the TV, they get their news on social media, and so that's not a bad thing. But I don't think the ABC is over that to the extent that it should be. So I think it does need to diversify. You know, you keep moving or you die. So the ABC does need to diversify quite significantly, and it needs to be inventive, I guess, and have a bit of a vision for the future that doesn't really quite potentially have right now. I think that, you know, it does have a pretty strong. It does lots of podcasts and it does do some stuff online, but I think it probably is not necessarily at the forefront of innovation to the extent that we would like it to be. But in terms of, it does want to be independent, and that's fine, but the ABC does want, you know, there's carrots and there's sticks. The carrot is that, you know, I think I'm going to be at another forum tomorrow night where we're going to be talking about anti-Semitism and the Jewish community and issues with the Jewish community as well. One of the things we could do is educate young people better, and we could use the ABC and every forum, that, you know, and the SBS and every other media platform at our disposal to advance that cause. We could give the ABC. I actually had a meeting with Kim Williams recently, and he said he was laying out to me how he wants to create a series of TV shows for civics education in Australia. And I have to say, some of the shows that he was talking about, you know, like the history of the ABCC and the history of that and the history of the union, there's a few things I was like, I can't wait for that one. But, you know, we could improve civics education. We could get the ABC and the SBS at the forefront of that sort of stuff to a greater extent, I think, than we have right now. And I think it does need to evolve, potentially, to some extent.
Yeah. So coming back to what I said before, I think we'll hopefully look at legislating against misinformation and disinformation in another term Parliament should we form government, and then as for what my opinion is on the ABC and how it could increase its relevance while keeping it independent from government, then I think it should probably look to have a more comprehensive strategy on social media and like being relevant on there, because I see things when I'm on social media. I see things from the Daily Mail in the UK and like CBS and NBC and stuff, and I do occasionally get something from the ABC or SBS, but it's I guess maybe they're not they're just not getting the algorithm right and producing videos that are going to gain enough traction and get on to the Australian content users recommended page.
Jackie?
I'm not going to touch on the mis and disinformation because I feel like we covered that before. But I think I guess following on from what Clive just said, I'm going to be a bit of a cynic here. And look, I think rightly so, is that everything online, particularly in the social media world, is pushed by algorithms. Really opaque algorithms that we don't have any idea what goes into them. And I think a part of increasing the ABC's reach is having some transparency around what is being pushed to our users and why, and unpicking that, because the ABC can be producing world-class content and pushing it out online, but if these tech giants don't want to push that content, and they don't, then it's not going to get the eyeballs that it should. So having somebody view the ABC content on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, whatever it might be, is of no value to those platforms if it takes the user off their platform. They want their eyeballs on their platform for as long as possible. So that is the intent of these tech giants. And I think, part of increasing the engagement from the younger cohort of people is not so much that the ABC is not producing good content, because we know it is. It is that it is not in the interests of tech giants to push that, and we need to, I think, work at that angle first.
Thank you. And the question over here.
I might be wrong about this, but I'll just give it one. Thank you. My understanding is that during the Voice campaign, the ABC was rather stymied by the no vote people not refusing to actually go on the ABC to any great extent, and therefore, in order to avoid bias, the ABC was put in a very difficult position in terms of putting the yes position. I wondered if any of you have any comments about that or suggestions, or even anybody who confirmed that that was true, but I do seem to remember it being the case sort of immediately after the referendum.
I don't know that that is true. I haven't heard that before, so I can't really speak to that particular issue. But I do think that one of the issues that we have in our media at the moment is the both sidesism. That, you know, there's that whole thing about, you know, if I say it's sunny outside and you say it's wet, it's not the reporter's job to report both sides, it's the reporter's job to look out the window. And I do think that our media has a tendency to give equal space and be very conscious to that, because it doesn't want to be, particularly ABC, accused of bias, that at times it platforms people who shouldn't be given a platform. And that is a frustration to me as a politician, that, you know, and to the professional media who might be in the room, you know, you know, it can be frustrating at times, because you think, well, you know, clearly what they're saying is not true, or, you know, clearly their position is not valid, but it seems like equal column inches or equal airtime is given to both sides in a way that's not always necessary or desirable.
Yeah, I can't really, I don't recall the no vote campaigners boycotting appearing on the ABC during the referendum campaign. But if that was the case, I think, yeah, the ABC, especially when it comes to elections and referendums, does need to remain impartial, and they can't give a disproportionate amount of coverage to one party or one side of their campaign. So yeah, they've probably had quite a lot of analysts on and people speaking to what the different arguments were about it, and I think that's important that they did that and continue to do that with elections and any referendums that we might have in another 20 years.
I also am unaware of whether or not that actually occurred with the no versus yes vote and the no people refusing to speak to the ABC. But I do think that there is, even if people aren't willing to speak to the ABC, that doesn't remove the ability to report on it. There is still the ability to find out information and report on the facts that are known. So I don't think that, you know, having a particular side of an argument or whatnot means that the general, I guess, position and outlay of an issue can't be reported on effectively.
Thank you very much, the three of you. Question at the back.
Hi, I apologise for coming late. So my question is about the social media ban. So if you've touched on this, feel free to just shake your heads and say move on. We know that in the 2 years leading up to the social media ban rolling out, that News Corp was really pushing the Let Them Be Kids campaign, saying that, you know, here's a story again and again of the spiky end of the problems with social media and mental health and things like that. And we've also seen politically organised seminars in Sydney and Adelaide with researchers talking about the problems with social media and bringing in different researchers that were really focusing on the negatives only, rather than the messiness of social media for young people and adults and so on. In the conversation tonight, we've seen a bit of a polarisation between legacy media, whether that's ABC to News Corp, newspapers, radio, and the tech giants, as if News Corp isn't a tech giant itself and isn't involved in pushing. I was pretty disappointed in Labor's movements to push this social media ban through. I'm wondering if anyone wanted to speak to that messiness of what even is social media? We see Daily Mail and other things popping up all the time, but that's supported by a broader media ecosystem, advertising on other spaces as well. But also we now have legislation next year that's going to kick in that really was pushed by News Corp, that was concerned about them losing the news deal, that Facebook was paying them for news. Now Facebook isn't paying them for news, so okay, let's side with News Corp rather than seeing how can we actually legislate for better privacy protections, better data protections and so on too. So if there's anything that anyone would like to speak to about that at all? Did that make sense?
Happy to.
It does make sense. We did actually talk about this
News
earlier.
Corp's role.
Okay, it was the first cab off the rank because it is an issue that a lot of people are concerned
And
about.
people talk about News Corp in that context.
No,
on
we,
their
no,
role.
we didn't bring in
Not
News
really,
Corp.
no.
Does anybody want to add to what we did
My
cover at the
apologies.
time? Or does anybody else want to add something to this? Because it's a debate that probably does affect a whole lot of people. Because you have young people in your family, in your midst. Do you want to add anything?
I think there's sort of two separate issues essentially. Basically, whether or not we should ban social media and whether that would be a good thing to do, and if so, whether we can do it and how. And I thought, we couldn't. Not at this point. We didn't have a plan to do that, and there was no clear plan on how we're going to do that or enforce it, which is why I did not support the legislation. But just in terms of News Corp's ability to push a social agenda, which we didn't touch on, I think it is fascinating with the increasing concentration of media in this country, the extent to which groups like News Corp can control conversations in society. The other one that I would raise is the current concern within our communities about crime and safety. There has been an increase in some forms of crime in many suburbs of Melbourne in the last year or two. There's no doubt about that. Other forms of crime have decreased in frequency, but there has been a pretty concerted campaign by the News Corp outlets in the last 6 or 12 months, I think, to really push this thing that we're all at risk and it's a terrible problem and there's a plague of it and things like that in a way that I don't think is helpful to us. But it's very hard to push back against that. And we haven't touched upon it, but I do think that media concentration in this country is a significant issue and something that we have to address.
Misinfo laws address some of the things that News Corp are pushing, or is that only in the social media realm?
They would, if the misinformation bill was passed, it could potentially address some of those things, yeah.
Yeah, so the social media ban we already touched on, and then the second part of your question, sorry, what was it?
News Corp's role in pushing for that ban to go through and sort of
laying
the groundwork for 2 years before that.
The social media ban, right? Yeah, well, I don't think it was just News Corp who was pushing for that. There were quite a lot of groups that were also involved in that, and I support the social media ban. As for the legislation you referred to about the fact they were getting advertised, they had an advertising deal with Meta, and then they didn't. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that legislation, so I can't really comment on it.
Yeah, just to speak to the beast that is the Murdoch media. Obviously, the Greens are very much in favour of a royal commission into the Murdoch saturation in our media landscape. It is nothing but a really detrimental mouthpiece, pushing out some really bad information. So we know that it has harms, and we see that, and part of that is tied up in News Corp pushing their agenda. I'm not sure if people were across a recent, social media issue that popped up through the election campaigning recently, which was had to do with podcasters having politicians or candidates on their podcasts, and then the Liberal Party reporting them to the ABC, saying that they should have authorisations on their podcast because they're platforming politicians and candidates and all that kind of thing. And a lot of people did argue that if that's the case, then all the Murdoch media news outlets should also have authorisations on them from the Liberal Party because they are just a mouthpiece for them. So, you know, there is definitely an issue there with the Murdoch media concentration in this country, and it needs to be addressed because we do see real harms coming from that.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question, and a hand has gone up.
Oh, there's a call.
Corner of the room.
Thank you very much. My name's Ian Huntley and I live in Baldwin North. I'd just like to go back to the funding issue again. I mean, the reality is that over the long haul, the funding for the ABC has been substantially diminished in a context in which the challenges to public service broadcasting and communications generally are much greater than they've ever been, and the functionality that's now required is much more demanding than it's ever been. I mean, my view is that the way to look at a budget for the ABC is to look at the functions that they should deliver. I mean, I understand that there has been an announcement today or yesterday about increased defensive funding as a proportion of GDP or proportion of the Commonwealth budget. Well, that's fine, but as far as the ABC is concerned, what we really need to do is to look at what the ABC should now be delivering, and I can identify many spaces where it's been found wanting, and I believe it's a funding issue. I mean, in areas of rural broadcasting, reporting on local government, foreign reportage, state-based reportage generally. We see many repeats on ABC News. We see reports that are portrayed as news 48 hours after first reported. That's no longer news. So the message I'd like to get across is that we basically really need to examine the functionality of the ABC in its various areas of responsibility and budget accordingly. My general view is that in real terms it should be immediately increased by 100%. Never mind 100 million here or there. But when you look at the long haul and the challenges facing the ABC now and the society generally, I think that's what we're really looking at.
Double the ABC's budget. We've only got a moment, but very quick response because we have touched on this to some extent, but Clive.
Yeah, we came to this earlier, and the Albanese government has reversed some of the cuts that took place in the Abbott Turnbull Morrison era to the tune of $40 million extra per year. And as for what the ABC delivers and how they deliver it and how they allocate the money that the funding that they're given in the federal budget, that's for them to determine specifically. Like, we're not going to put out a federal budget and have line items, you know, how much they can spend on stationery a year. And yeah, we don't have any further plans to give them any more funding, and we haven't made any announcements in that space. And I can't say that Labor, if we're elected, will double the ABC's budget, because that's not in our plans. So
why not?
Yeah, my comment.
Yeah, we did previously touch on our position on funding and whatnot, so I'll just reiterate that the Greens believe that we should restore the ABC's funding to pre-2014 levels with indexation included. I do think there is an important point from what I gathered from what felt a bit more like a statement than a question, which was, there's probably a place to determine what outcomes we're trying to achieve with the ABC services and then work backwards from there. So, we can throw as much money at things as we like, but unless we have particular outcomes we're trying to achieve, then I think a lot of that can kind of get muddied. So, and in addition to that, as I said, the Greens would really like to see the ABC funding legislated, whether that be a percentage with the GDP or whatnot, but just not at the whim of the government of the day and the budget that they're making up on that day. So we'd like to see that.
So I guess someone asked me the other day, should we increase our defence spending, as a proportion of GDP? And I said, well, when John Curtin took us to war in 1939, he didn't think, I must increase our defence spending from 1.6 to 2% of GDP. He thought, what do I need? I need a few planes and maybe a few, ships. So I think it probably does make sense actually for the ABC's, an increase in ABC funding to be predicated on delivery of certain things. That would actually help us future-proof it, because a future Liberal government that might want to find some efficiencies would have to make a case for which things we would be losing as a result of that if we did have greater clarity about where the money was going and what it was delivering for us. And so I actually don't think it's unreasonable I do think we probably do need to increase things. We do need to increase local content production. We do need to restore some of the regional and rural services, because you lose them and they don't come back. We do need to help train more young journalists in that setting, and we do need to increase our footprint in the Asia Pacific. But there should be deliverables that are attached to that and some transparency around that. And I think that the funding of the ABC, I actually don't agree. Sorry, Jackie, I don't think that should be legislated. I think it should be determined by an independent body on the basis of performance and delivery. And that would make it, I think it would give people greater certainty that the money was being well spent. And I do think that it would future-proof it against future Conservative governments.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody. It's been an exciting evening. The things that happen. But particularly to our panellists this evening, Jackie Carter from the Greens, Clive Crosby from the Labor Party, and Dr Monique Ryan, the independent current MP for the seat of Kooyong. We do have refreshments at the back of the room, and you're very much welcome to join us for a drink and a nibble of something. And what can we say? All the best to everybody for the 3rd of May.
One more thing. Happy birthday to Clive for tomorrow.